it's the face, it's a system that Muslims are fighting, that Christians are also fighting. It is also worth noting that during the medieval and modern eras, the Christianity encountered by Islam at the time was not any different. The Christianity that Muslims encountered in those periods of the time was also imperialistic, it was also conquering, it was also invading, and it was also capturing. So it's not like Christians were simply victims. Ethiopian Christianity also became militarized. And Ethiopian Christianity also became very aggressive in many ways. In the encounters, Christendom won in Ethiopia, the Christians won in Ethiopia, and the Muslims won in North Africa and in Nubia. So it has not like Christians were simply the victims of the conquest. And so we should not think that Christianity is just a pacifist religion and Islam was aggressor. At that time, the two traditions engaged in conquest. Now, I want to move on to the next phase of the encounters, where during the arrival of the European colonial and missionary era, where Africa became the theater for missions and for da'wah. And therefore, we have a situation where Muslims and Christians were now encountering each other as missionaries and also as conquerors, and if you like, vying for political control of Africa. We've already heard about the Portuguese who got involved in East Africa. Now the Portuguese intervention in East Africa was also very much military in its nature. The Portuguese got involved with wars with the Ottoman Empire. They also got involved with the war against Ahmad Gran. And Ahmad Gran was defeated with the help of the Portuguese by the Ethiopians. But the Portuguese made a mistake. After conquering Ahmad Gran, the Portuguese missionaries or the Catholic fathers at the time, known as the Jesuits, they started to evangelize Ethiopian Christians, converting Ethiopian Christians or the Orthodox Christians in Ethiopia because they did not believe that they were good Christians, and rebaptizing them. And that angered the Ethiopian church. And the Syrian church rose up in alliance with Muslims, and they conquered and defeated the Portuguese and drove the Portuguese out of the East Coast. On the West Coast, the Portuguese encounter with Islam was also very much in the form of debates and polemics. And I've got this quote from one of the early Portuguese missionaries or travelers in West Africa. And he says that, he reports that a certain bishop of their church, that's the Muslim church, he calls it a church, was there, a native of Mali, who asked me about God and Christians. And I answered him according to the intelligence that God had given me. I finally questioned him respecting Muhammad, in whom they believe. What I said pleased his lordship, that's the king, so much that he ordered the bishop, that's the Muslim cleric, within 3 days to leave his kingdom. In other words, he confronted a Muslim cleric in the presence of a traditional ruler and defeated him in arguments, and he was driven away. So it was very much military and polemical debates at this point in time. Now the Muslim Christians encounter in Africa at this time was mainly between European Christians and African Muslims. The European missionaries made their duty to undermine Islam and to prove to Muslims by argument that Islam is not, that Christianity is superior to Islam. And so, one of the main points at this point was there was a debate in Europe about the nature of Islam. What was Islam like? Was Islam suitable to Africans? Or was it not suitable? And this debate simply was that there were those who said Islam was best suited to Africans, and there were those who said it wasn't. Those who said Islam best suited Africans said that Islam is not as good as Christianity. Islam was not good enough for Europeans. But if you look at the native tribes of Africa, at least Islam was good for them. Because it was not so sophisticated, and the African mind could understand it better. And so it was a sort of tolerance for Islam, but it was also prejudice for Islam. And Professor Lamin Sande has said that this is kind of a double prejudice. He said this is a prejudice against Islam in Victorian times, as in later times, was being covertly perpetrated in the guise of tolerance, even paternalistic indulgence for Islamized Africa. This apparently tolerant attitude also concealed a corresponding prejudice against black Africans. Islam is not a high religion, but it's good for the Africans. That was the argument. On the other side were Christian Africans, or Christian missionaries who took exception, and they said Islam is not good for Africans. And one of the missionaries' arguments, I read this from the Edinburgh 1910 conference report, and this is one of the arguments. Can Islam effect the redemption of Africa? What has Islam made of the Africa it has dominated for centuries? What can it make of the future of Africa? It's a religion without the knowledge of the divine fatherhood, a religion without compassion for those outside its pale. And to the whole of womanhood of Africa, it is a religion for despair and doom. So their argument was that Islam was not good for Africans. Islam was bad for Africa, if you like. It goes on to argue, the report goes on to argue that if we do not counteract the advance of Islam with all our energy, and along the whole line, we shall lose not only the large parts of now pagan Africa, but even the territories already Christianized. The main battle, and listen to the language, the main battle against Mohammedans in the immediate future will be fought on East African soil. Here the enemy is already before our doors. This was the language of the time. It was a battle, and they had to confront and fight the Muslims on the East Coast for the sake of Africa. Leading African Christians at the time took exception to this kind of categorization of Islam. And you have someone like Edward Blyden. Edward Blyden was one of the people that Professor W. referred to the other day in his paper. Edward Blyden argued that you cannot demonize Islam. Islam was an African religion. Islam had elevated Africans to a level that Christianity in European hands could not do. And he was blaming, he was saying that don't demonize it. This is part of our African system now, and it has done some good even in Africa. Islam has done for vast tribes of Africa what Christianity in the hands of Europeans has not yet done, he argued. It has cast out the demons of fetishism, general ignorance of God, drunkenness and gambling, and has introduced customs which subserve the highest purposes of growth and preservation. This was Blyden's argument. And then we have someone, Ajayi Crowder, who also emerged. So Blyden was saying that Christianity is foreign to us. Islam has done its best for Africans. Ajayi Crowder also decided, he joined the debate and the polemical trend at the time. And as we learned the other day, he got his fingers bent. The first time, he argued with the Quran and the Bible. And then he said, he felt humiliated in his own accounts. He said, I was humiliated because all my arguments failed. And so he decided to adopt a different approach. And the approach that he adopted, as Professor Walls describes, Ajayi Crowder adopted an African Christian approach to Islam in an African setting. He parted company from the assumptions about Islam that had been current in missionary writings in Crowder's formative years. There was no denunciation, no allegation of imposture or false prophecy. For the future, he looked to an African Christian community with effective knowledge in the Bible. In other words, polemics Crowder felt was not helpful for Africa. And so he decided to go into apologetics. I want to go on quickly to just mention something that the Holy Father or the Catholic Pope, Pope Benedict the 16th, has said about Africa.
He's the Holy Father.
He's the Holy Father.
You didn't make a mistake. Go on.
I know that's not a mistake. Pope Benedict the 16th is reported to have said that Africa is the spiritual land of the world. Africa is the spiritual land of the world. And what does it mean? If Africa is the spiritual land of the world, it means that Africa is very